Oh shit, you guys have no idea how fast the world is actually changing, right beneath our feet while everyone is staring at their phone screens. I was just talking to one of my Patreon members last week, and he sent me this list of stocks that honestly made my jaw drop. Two of those companies are up over 2,000% in just the past 5 years, and most people have never even heard their names. They are all companies that support the massive data center and AI buildouts, which proves that this AI revolution has already paid off at scale at least once, and really the billion-dollar question now is who carries that momentum into the next chapter while the hype starts to settle into reality. So what I did is I took his list and I did a deep dive to find several more names that are flying under the radar. I'm going to be covering 10 names in this video where most of them are going to be completely new to your watch list, and keep in mind that it is vital to get familiar with these names now, but you have to wait for the right moment to buy after you've done your own research. If you are new here, then you probably don't know me or the fact that I actually retired at 46, all thanks to my personal investments, and this was after a long career with companies like Target and Amazon, where I happen to have made them billions upon billions of dollars in profit. So before we dive in, I do want to point out that I am not financial advisor, and this is only for educational purposes and sharing my journey. Now, when the biggest names in tech are throwing insane amounts of money at AI, there are 4 layers of infrastructure before it ever reaches a server rack. We are thinking about the contractors who physically build out the data centers or the heavy equipment that goes inside the walls. And then, of course, there is the cooling equipment or the hidden layer of fiber materials and the on-site power that keeps the lights on. I am going to walk through the best names in each of those layers, and at the end, I will tell you exactly how I would invest if I were starting fresh. But if you want to see exactly what I am buying and selling in real time, I do give access to all of that. In my Patreon group, I also provide additional research and analysis every week, like my watch list of stocks like the ones that I am covering. Today, we will start with Tier 1, which consists of the contractors who physically build these massive data centers. The hyperscalers like Microsoft, Amazon, Google, Meta, and Oracle are spending over $700 billion on AI infrastructure this year alone. And this isn't just a one-year boom or some temporary bubble that is going to pop tomorrow morning. McKinsey projects $7 trillion in global data center spending through 2030, which is a number so big it feels fake. Most of the companies on this list already have orders booked through 2028, so the revenue is basically locked in. I am not going to lie, when I first read that $7 trillion number, I had a really hard time believing it because it sounds like a typo that happens to be 23% of the entire US GDP for 2025, and somebody has to physically construct every single brick of that first. On this layer is Comfort Systems USA, where they install the mechanical, electrical, and plumbing systems inside these buildings. When a hyperscaler wants one company to handle everything inside the building, fix is the one that they call for the job. What they have accomplished is truly transformative for a company that used to be seen as a boring HVAC contractor. Data center customers went from a third of their revenue 2 years ago to over half of their revenue this past quarter, and Fix ended with a record $12.4 billion backlog that nearly doubled year over year, which is just insane growth. For context, if you had invested $1,000 in Comfort Systems in the spring of 2021, you would have roughly $22,000 today. That is a 22-bagger in 5 years for a mechanical contractor, and honestly, who would have ever guessed that would happen? And here's the kicker for you math nerds: their operating margin more than doubled in that same window. Return on invested capital sits at a massive 62%, and they are carrying effectively zero debt on the balance sheet. These are software company economics on a mechanical contractor, which is the ultimate goldmine for investors. Next is HEIST Holdings, where they handle the electrical work that brings these data centers to life in the first place. Cabling, fiber, low voltage systems, and the wires and boxes that connect the racks are all their specialty. Their communication segment serves data centers, and the numbers there have been extraordinary, where their total backlog jumped 62%. Now, what makes HEIST different is their size, because they are still relatively small in the grand scheme of things. They are running at around $12.6 billion in market cap, which means they are still small enough to compound aggressively. The revenue compounded at 23% every year for 5 straight years, while operating margin nearly tripled, and earnings per share has multiplied nearly 8 times, which is what gets this stock to a 10-bagger status. Now, for me, the metric to watch on HEIST is that communication segment growth, because it tells you the real story. As long as that segment keeps printing 35% plus, then hyperscaler demand is intact and the runway just extends into the distance. Now, we've been talking about the physical AI build-out, but there is another build-out happening on the science side, and that brings us to today. Sponsor Telescope Innovations, where I first covered them back in January. Developing a drug requires up to 30,000 experiments, and one chemist can usually only run about 5 a week. Telescope self Driving Lab does a year of that work in a single week, where AI designs the experiments and robots execute based on management's projections. Their technology cuts development costs from $900 million down to $300 million, and it shaves 5 years off a 10-year cycle, which means 50% more high-margin patent monetization for the pharma companies they ship their first commercial driving lab in December, and in January Pfizer installed a second one. That is really big news because it validates the need for this technology at the highest levels of the industry. Their second existing product, Direct Inject LC, is already used by 15 of the 20 largest pharma companies in the world. The team includes the only living two-time Nobel laureate in chemistry as well as founder and CTO Dr. Jason Hein. Collectively, this team is attributed with 34 patents and 450 academic publications, which is a massive amount of brainpower, and Telescope has expanded into lithium refining with 2 proprietary processes and a strategic project with Standard Lithium. This ties directly into the need for critical minerals, which then again ties back to the AI build-out and the grid. If you want to learn more about Telescope innovations with a ticker TEEF, please check out the link down in the description. Third on this list is Quanta Services, the largest pure-play infrastructure contractor in the entire category power. Transmission, communications, and energy infrastructure work for hyperscalers and utilities across multiple sites. They are the public company that hyperscalers call when they need $1 billion of work coordinated across multiple cities. Now, here's the stat that you should be seeing because it shows the sheer scale of what we are dealing with. Quanta's backlog now sits at over $48 billion, which is bigger than most of the companies on this list combined. Management also raised full-year revenue guidance into the $35 billion range, which shows total confidence, and a major portion of that backlog is locked in through long-term master service agreements rather than just one-time deals. That is the kind of revenue visibility that locks in years of forward earnings for patient investors. Like us, the data center segment now represents around 10% of total backlog, and it is growing every single day. Quanta is fundamentally a scale story where revenue compounded at 20% annually, and the stock has returned 7 times. For me, Quanta is the credibility anchor of the entire AI build-out because they are the boots on the ground. If hyperscalers are spending real money on real construction, Quanta catches a meaningful share of all of those dollars. Now we move on to Tier 2, and that is the heavy equipment that goes inside the buildings once the shell is done: switchgear, transformers, and power distribution. Are the hardware that every single data center needs to function, whether the racks are full of Nvidia chips or AMD chips. It just doesn't matter because the power needs remain the same. The first name on this layer is Powell Industries, where they design and build the high-voltage switchgear. Their CEO started strategically aligning the company with hyperscalers around 2022, and financials reflect that shift. Powell was a small cap nobody in early 2021 that has run so fast that they had to do a 3-for-1 stock split in fiscal 2021. Powell was essentially just breaking even, and their operating margin was nearly zero, which is scary. 4 years later, that operating margin has expanded to nearly 20%, while revenue more than doubled in that window. That is exactly what an industrial pivot to data centers looks like when the execution hits the mark perfectly. Their most recent quarter confirmed the trend, where Powell ended with a record $1.6 billion backlog. Next is Eaton Corporation, where they make the power management equipment that goes inside every major data center on Earth. This is the switchgear, the busways, and the UPS systems that get specified in every greenfield hyperscaler build. Eaton is by far the largest name on this layer at over $167 billion in market cap. So it is a giant. Total data center orders were up over 200% year over year in their most recent reported quarter, which is mind-blowing. Electrical America's backlog reached a record $13.2 billion in management notes that this represents over a decade of work. Eaton also recently acquired Boyd, a leading liquid cooling company, expected to generate $1.7 billion in annual sales. Their operating margin has gone from 19% to over 24% in just 5 years, and earnings per share has roughly tripled. The stock has returned more than 3 times since 2021, which is rare compounding for an industrial giant of this size. Now we move on to Tier 3, which is the cooling layer, and this is where things get really hot. Literally, the new generation of Nvidia AI racks pull 132 kilowatts of power, which is nearly 10 times what a Ion rack pulls. In the most blunt of terms, air cooling just can't handle that much heat. Without the building melting down, liquid cooling is the only answer. And first on this list is Modine Manufacturing, where they build the distribution units. They happen to be the smallest pure play in this video, and the financial pivot they made is the most dramatic transition. Just look at where Modine was just 5 years ago in fiscal 2021, when they were a complete disaster on paper. Operating margin came in at a negative 5.4%, and they were literally on the chopping block for a hostile takeover. 4 years later, operating margin has flipped to a positive 11%, and the earnings per share has moved to a healthy gain. The stock has returned roughly 17 times, and clearly the data center pivot is what saved this entire company. Climate Solutions revenue grew 51% year over year, while data center sales alone were up a massive 78%. Next on the cooling list is Carrier Global, where they make commercial and data center cooling systems at massive scale. Carrier is a different kind of pick than the rest of the names on this layer because it is more of a value play. The 5 Year return is roughly 55%, and it is actually the lowest return in this entire video so far, but you just need to simply look at their most recent quarter where global data center orders were up over 500%. Their integrated Quantum Leap data center offering has booked roughly $400 million in orders in its first year. Carrier is now publicly working with Nvidia on cooling designs for the next gen of Blackwell infrastructure. Now we move on to the fourth tier, which happens to be the hidden layer of the AI economy. This is the fiber, the cooling components, and the behind-the-meter power that none of this works without. But these companies sit just 1 or 2 steps removed from the GPU, so they don't show up in most analyst models the first name on. The hidden layer is Belden, where they make the PHY and the cabling that connects the chips. Their broader business spans industrial automation and smart building infrastructure, but data centers are the driver. Belden has been a steady recovery story since 2020, with revenue compounding at roughly 9% annually. Operating margin is expanding, and the company is moving from a net loss to solid profitability and growth. Now here is where it gets a little bit interesting, because Belden just announced a massive acquisition. They are acquiring Ruckus Networks for $1.8 billion in cash, which is a huge bet on their future Ruckus. Adds wide i7 access points and cloud management networking to a company that already owns the fiber backbone. In just one simple move, Belden goes from a cable company to a full-stack networking infrastructure powerhouse. The stock got hit pretty hard on the deal because the market doesn't yet trust the integration of these two firms, while every other name in this video is making new highs. Belden is sitting at one of the cheapest multiples out there, despite delivering revenue up over 11%. This is one you definitely want to watch and do a little extra research on. Next on the hidden layer is Mueller Industries, where they are the only vertically integrated copper manufacturer in North America. They supply critical cooling components into the plumbing and HVAC systems that data centers absolutely rely on to stay cool. The most recent quarter was extraordinary, where net income jumped nearly 52% and gross margin expanded. Mueller also raised their quarterly dividend by 40%, which is the 6th consecutive year of double-digit increases. That is the kind of capital return move that you make when management is highly confident in the forward cash flow. Revenue compounded at 12% annually for 5 years, while their operating margin roughly doubled to over 21%. The stock returned more than 6.5 times since 2021, proving that copper is just as important as code. Last on the hidden layer is Bloom Energy, where they manufacture fuel cells that generate electricity. On site, they are the only public pure play on behind-the-meter power generation for data centers in the entire market. Their most recent quarter came in well ahead of consensus, and revenue was up 130% year over year. Oracle agreed to procure up to 2.8 gigawatts of Bloom as fuel cell systems, which is a massive validation of the tech. Total contracted backlog sits at roughly $20 billion, and they are scaling capacity as fast as humanly possible. Those Patreon stocks that I opened with prove that this AI build-out paid off once it began to scale. For the early birds, these 10 names are how I would carry it into the next chapter and how I am prioritizing them in my own head. Now, I am not saying that I would invest into all of these at once, because that would be a little bit crazy, but I am going to say this is how I am going to prioritize them in a ranking order for my own portfolio. So how would I actually invest $100 across this group if I were starting completely fresh today? I would start with $30 into tier 1, which is the contractors, because they have the most direct exposure. Then I would put $25 into tier 2, which is the equipment makers for that world-class capital efficiency. Then I would put $20 into tier 3, which is cooling, because it is the highest growth subsegment of the whole thing. And last, I would put $25 into tier 4, the hidden layer, where the rare value names and the contrarian setups live. My point of view is that I am going to put higher allocations going to the names with the cleanest balance sheets. And of course, as I tried to see, cackle down the smaller allocations, go to the higher volatility names. Just like my other investments, I have to give a massive shout out to the Patreon group, because they surface so many of these gems for me. Hopefully you got some real value from this breakdown today, because the AI trade is so much bigger than just chips. As always, thank you so much for watching and being part of this community. As we build wealth together, stay disciplined, do your own homework, and I will see you in the next one. Peace.